So we have our multi-generational workforce. There are 4 generations right now working alongside each other. Gen Z is new. They are the newbies to the workforce, the youngest. They make up part of nearly 50% of the workforce, combined with millennials. Then, of course, we can't forget about Gen X and baby boomers, who make up the remaining 50%. But something's coming, a big change. In just 5 short years, Millennials and Gen Z will make up 75% of the workforce. So this here that you see, that may change. This may be replaced by a couple of younger faces. So this is right now. Everyone's working together. We have all ages, and look, they look pretty happy, right? So how do we get this? How do we get everyone working together, working in harmony, being good to each other? Well, let's start with understanding a little bit more about millennials and Gen Z. So what do millennials and Gen Z want? A few things. Top work priorities for them, besides, of course, fair pay, because who doesn't want that? Opportunities to learn, opportunities to develop, and flexibility at work. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the first 2, which are very related. How do we get them to learn at work? Well, that's partially our job as leaders, as senior peers to them. Provide them with opportunities to learn in as many ways as possible. One of the best ways is coaching. Coaching can happen formally, whether it's a program that you've developed, or informally. You see them doing something, you give them some tips and pointers as they go. We can also do mentoring, and one of my favorites, reverse mentoring. So when you think about the traditional mentoring, you have older person, more experienced person versus younger, newer to the workforce. What if we flip it? Everyone has value to add. Have the millennial or the Gen Z employee mentoring that senior person, Gen X, baby boomer. It can even be someone 2-3 years apart. We have to kind of flip it to bring ourselves into this new field of work, which is more flexible, more engaging. So how do you implement a reverse mentoring program? Well, first of all, you have to make sure that everyone's on board with it. People don't necessarily like to change. That's something that we see in the workplace as millennials and Gen Z are coming. Sometimes there's conflict between the generations. So when we implement something new, saying, oh, you as a senior executive, you as a head developer, now you're going to learn from this young person. You might be a bit hesitant about that at first. So keeping an open mind really helps with this. And in keeping an open mind, you're actually helping those millennials and Gen Z employees grow and develop. Keeping it informal, as you can see with these people here, they are having a conversation. Learning does not have to be textbook, open page 1, go through this, go through that. It should grow with them. This is also how we provide them with opportunities to develop. Nobody wants to be stuck in the same job for an indefinite period of time. Raise your hand if you would love to do exactly what you're doing for the entire rest of your career with no changes. Right, no one raised their hand. Exactly. So how can we expect these millennial and Gen Z employees to want to keep doing the same thing? What they actually expect is for it to go even quicker, even faster, that they can grow and develop. So how do we tap into that? We create opportunities. Promotion does not have to be climbing the ladder anymore. It can go in a horizontal direction. That can be taking on more responsibility. That can be becoming the lead on a project. It doesn't have to be permanent. It can be something where they've earned that maybe chance to take the lead, they get it, and if it works, then great, and if it doesn't, then it's an opportunity for them to develop, which goes right back into coaching, training, developing, providing opportunities to learn. So the next one is, of course, here we have your typical millennials looking at screens. But guess what? These guys are working. I mean, fine, maybe one of them is on Facebook. But let's say for the most part, they're working. This is what they expect: flexibility in the workplace. They want to be able to do their work from wherever they are, because to them, it's truly possible. They don't need to be tied to a desk, tied to an office. In fact, they actually feel a bit stifled by being tied to that. And in their minds, why should they sit at a desk when they can do the same work pretty much anywhere, whether that's anywhere in the world, whether that's anywhere simply at a coffee shop or in the comfort of their apartment? The trick with this flexibility of work is holding them accountable. So of course the question is, if they're not physically in the workplace, how do we ensure that they're actually working, they're actually being productive? We hold them accountable, and we provide them with feedback. Now, feedback is a very important tool when done correctly. So how do we give the best feedback? Continuously. We'll explore that in a minute. How do we engage millennials and Gen Z at work? Well, remember that feedback? That's how. We keep them as part of the conversation. We make them truly a part of it. By providing them with continuous feedback, they're able to learn as they go, develop as they go, which are two of their top priorities. So when you're able to tap into those, plus giving them feedback, which helps them develop and helps you help them, and in turn, of course, by developing them, you're benefiting from that as a company, as a leader, as part of a team on a project. Feedback is the #1 tool for all employees. Of course, we talk about it here in the lens of millennials and Gen Z. But in reality, we all need that feedback. So what are the two most important things when we think about feedback? One is the way it's delivered. Too often, we want to kind of soften the way that we talk about it. So we give a compliment first, and then we give the critique. And then sometimes we follow it up with another compliment. That doesn't work. You're actually diluting the message. You have to start strong. Find the issue and state what that is. Then what should be followed is why it's important and how to change and improve that. If you do that, you'll go to part 2, which is then the reception of the feedback. By providing it properly, explaining it, it will be much better received, and you won't have the employees that go, "No, I didn't do that," or they hang their head and go, "Oh no, maybe I'm doing something terrible, maybe I'm wrong." If you frame it right, it's clear, it's easy to understand, it's easy for them to digest, and again, we go back full circle. When they know what they need to improve, they're able to learn how to improve it. So millennials and Gen Z are only half the equation. How can we all work together? Because clearly, if only 50% of us are engaged, what happens to the other 50%? Well, it starts with understanding each other. If we don't understand each other, we cannot work together. This is where many of the conflicts arise. We're operating on stereotypes. We're operating on biases. How does that help bring us together? It doesn't. It drives us apart. We want a workplace to look like this, where everyone is enjoying themselves, they're chatting amongst each other. But unfortunately, what happens is conflict. Stop thinking about us versus them. Think about us as a whole. We are much more similar than we are different. But what do we always talk about? The differences. Well, why is that? Because that's easy. Everyone knows how they're different from someone because that's what's obvious. It doesn't take much effort to find what's different. You have two colors, red and green. They're obviously different. So we take a look at people the same way. Oh, I'm a millennial. Someone out there is a baby boomer. We must be absolutely different. But we're not. This is that us versus them. What about us? What if we take the time to really think about how are we alike? When we think about differences, we get this. This does not make for a productive work environment, a happy work environment, a good environment for any generation. This is what we want. We have to focus on bridging the gap, bringing people together, not driving people apart. And this is what happens with the multi-generational workforce, is that right now, we are all working at our own agendas. We're all trying to do our own thing. And without any way to bring that together, it's not going to be a successful workplace. It's not going to be a successful project. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we're already at 50-50. What happens when we're at 75%, Millennials and Gen Z? Then what? Are we going to have this conflict even more? Or are we going to be able to resolve it by the time that happens? Well, I'm going to be optimistic and say that we can resolve it because it's up to us, every single one of us here, to challenge the way that you think, to start looking for those similarities and not the differences. So here's the age-old question. Who should change? This is where we can't go us versus them. There is no answer. It should not be millennials must, Gen X must. We all have to change. We have to be adaptable, though. Imagine a dog running in circles, chasing its tail. It's not really getting anywhere. It's going to keep doing that until it finally stops. Well, this is what we do with this generational challenge and these conflicts. Imagine you're on a team where you've got at least two different generations. And I'll use the example of a millennial and a baby boomer. You're in a meeting, trying to come up with an idea, pitching new things. The millennial has great ideas, they're throwing things out there, and the baby boomer is telling them no, or maybe, or we'll think about that, which we all know is code for not going to happen. Well, then the boomer starts to talk and saying, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it. And the millennials may be thinking, well, why? We've been doing it like that forever. What's the reason? Well, there's that us versus them. There's where the stereotypes are coming into play. Because most likely, what's going through the millennial's head is this baby boomer is stuck in their ways. This baby boomer doesn't want to change. And the baby boomer is thinking, oh, this millennial who has no respect for the way we've done things, they just want to come in and change up everything, and with their ideas and with their infinite wisdom that they don't actually have. Well, you hear what I'm saying? That's all stereotypes. None of that is proven by fact. This is simply two people having a conversation, but not actually listening to each other, but rather what's in their own minds. They're not actually figuring out a way to work together, but working at their own agendas in two separate paths. So this is the classic case of should the baby boomer change or should the millennial change? The answer is both. Meet in the middle. Figure out ways that you can use the new ideas, maybe innovate. Then how does that play into some of the traditional processes that are in place? A lot of the processes are there for a reason, and they work. Then there are also ones that are there arbitrarily because we've done them for so long. So bridge the gap together, both with the generations and with the way that we're approaching work. This is what we want. We want this not at all post-doc photo of people celebrating, working together. This is what we can achieve if we change the way we think. if we all figure out ways to look inside of ourselves and realize, are we creating some of these generational issues internally and projecting them? Are we letting our biases drive us? Or are we able to open our minds? So again, the question becomes, how do we do this? How do we change our minds? Easier said than done, of course. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes time. We have to be able to look into ourselves and say, I understand that I am biased, and I am going to make the effort to change. That is every single person, every single generation. The only way we achieve this work euphoria is by understanding. So how can you take your time to do this? It does not matter what role you are in, what stage of your career, or what generation. You simply need to make sure that you are viewing everything with two things. One, a mentality of us together, and two, an open mind. With these two things, we'll be able to resolve these generational conflicts. And hopefully, as Gen Z enters the workplace, we'll see this shift. We speak a lot about the differences and the challenges with millennials. I am hoping that we won't have the same conversations when it comes to Gen Z. I'm hoping that we will be able to move beyond this. Again, we have until 2025 before they make up the majority. So let's work in that next 5 to 6 years to really make sure that when 2025 happens, we meet again, we'll be having discussions on how to boost productivity between the generations and how to ensure that the next generation after Gen Z can come into the workforce and just dive right in. We need to work harder than we have to bridge these gaps. We need to find ways to implement these programs. Creating a learning opportunity at work does not have to cost money, so there should be no barriers. It does not have to be formal or time-consuming, so those should not be barriers. Working on a diverse team, whether we're talking age, race, sexual orientation, whatever it may be, should not be a barrier. We need to work together. We need to start figuring out the ways that we can talk only about us and no longer us versus them. Understand the differences, but embrace the similarities. If we do that, if we embrace the fact that we all want the same thing, everyone at work wants fair pay, proper hours. Nobody wants to be working an 80-hour work week. Everyone wants respect. That is not a generational issue. That is something that we all want, that we all need. But what's getting in the way of that are these generational differences. We're so much at war with ourselves and each other that we are focusing on resolving those conflicts. And in this case, we're not able then to move on and get down to the facts and figures of figuring out how do we compensate people fairly? How do we ensure that everyone in the workplace feels comfortable, is respected? The elephant in the room is the generational challenges. And they are not differences, they are challenges. A difference doesn't have a solution. It's not an action we can take. A challenge, that's an action. A challenge has a solution. And that solution is something that every one of you in this room can do and must do. So I challenge you, when you go back to your workplace, to have a conversation with someone of another generation, someone that you've either had a conflict with in the past or really have never even spoken to. Ask them to maybe tell you about themselves, or ask them, hey, Did you see this film that was just out? And maybe they did, and maybe you both like that film. That's a way to bridge the gap. So I leave you with that, only a small bit of homework, and then I hope when I see you next year, when I ask each and every one of you if you had that conversation and how it went, that you guys will all respond, it went great, and I learned something, and I was able to start to bridge that generational gap. So I want to open it up to questions. We should have our Slido coming up. So I'd love to know what you guys want to know. What can I help you more with? Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. The first one got upvotes because of the last two words. How to motivate Gen Z folks other than the free beer?
Well, it's all about the free beer. Oh, and ping pong tables. No, all joking aside, how do you motivate them? You provide them with a workplace that is embracing the fact that they are young. Because here's where their age does come into play. They're young, they're inexperienced. They don't know what a so-called traditional workplace is supposed to look like. Gen Z has grown up with mobile everything. Everything they need is at the palm of their hands. Going to a traditional workplace where there may be a barrier to that, maybe they're told no cell phones, maybe they're told that you have to use a company laptop, let them use their own things, let them integrate a bit of their technical aptitude into it. And I'll be honest, the free beer actually only brings them in. It doesn't really motivate them after week 4 because they realize that maybe the free beer is covering up something else, like a bad company culture, or the fact that there's free beer and you can drink it after 5 p.m. because we expect you to be in the office for an additional 4 hours. So think about the company culture. Think about what you can do to embrace the fact that they are digital natives, that they are mobile connected more than any other generation that's ever come.
Perfect, thank you. I think the next one could be, I want to grab the one that just bounced down a little bit. So what do you think about young Gen Z, Z and millennial leaders? This could be probably a string of presentations itself, but any thoughts on how they can effectively lead teams?
And that's it, and I'll give you the very shortened version of this, because otherwise we'll be here for another 3 hours. But one thing with having a millennial leading, so is it? I'm reading the wrong one. Millennial leaders. How can they effectively lead multi-generational teams? Providing them with the tools. So often they'll need a little bit more help with communication. That's usually one of the biggest barriers, is that they don't know how to communicate effectively, or their methodology of communicating is actually alienating the older workers. We see a big conflict when you have a young leader managing a more senior team. So provide them with the right tools, help them understand the right methodology of communication, whether that's face-to-face, writing a properly composed email, using Slack, or hosting a meeting. Oftentimes, the communication gets blurred. They like to do everything just quick and digital, so a Slack message or an email, when that may not be the right medium. And then again, back to that understanding. You have to help both sides of the team, and sometimes this is where HR or learning and development or even just an elected peer-to-peer mediator can come in and help them all understand that the leadership may be a younger person, but they are still respected and they still have knowledge to bring to the table. So it's about teaching both the millennial and the team members.
Perfect, thank you. And oh boy, I wish we'd have time to go into, the next one, for example, looks like there could be some emotional attachment there. But Ashira, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Here is a token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
With your artistic impression there.
Love it. Thank you, guys.